feel free to ask a question anytime on Padlet, and we will try to address it at a proper time. So yeah, I think that that's it for the interaction. You can also interact with us through emoticons, of course, but you guys all know that. All right, cool. So thank you guys so much for being with me on stage and being with me in the panel. We will all introduce ourselves briefly. If you want to read our whole biography, you can check out the description of the events to get some more details. So, hey, it's nice to see you. I'm Evelyn. I'm currently doing research about assessment in VR. So I'm busy trying to research how VR training for vocational technical education can be best assessed. So I'm really busy with gathering data, analyzing data, and interpreting it. Yeah, that's in brief what I do. So, Geraldine, will you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. Hi, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. For those who don't know me, my name is Geraldine Periguet, and I'm the CEO and founder of XR Pedagogy. And I like to describe myself as a coach in child psychology applied to virtual environments. So our company, XR Pedagogy, aims to ease the use of virtual reality and augmented reality for educative purpose. And we design online course for teacher and parents of homeschooler. But we also do research, and our area of interest is how VR can impact risk perception for natural disaster preparedness of teenagers. So I had the honor of to present my project here at one of the Evelyn workshop. If you want, you can watch the replay on our XR Pedagogy channel, if you like. So yes, I'm super happy to discuss a little bit more about the tiny experience I've got in VR and research, and of course to exchange with all of you guys.
Awesome, thank you. Anthony, you want to be the next one?
Sure. Hello, all. It's me over here. How are we doing? So my name is Anthony Chaston. I'm a professor of psychology at Mount Royal University in Calgary, in Canada. And I'm involved in VR in a few different ways. From a teaching perspective, I'm developing a new course that our university is going to be delivering in alt space, and projects, which is the scholarship of teaching and learning. So doing research into how to teach and learn more effectively. Obviously, my focus is on virtual reality, so teaching and learning in virtual reality. So I have that element. And then from a research component, where I'm also doing research into virtual reality nature therapy. So how to use nature scenes and such in virtual reality to lower stress levels. So I have a line of research that we do in the lab. We've been bringing people in and testing them. So an experimental sort of field, as well as the teaching research total end of things. So that's the kind of research I'm in. I tend to teach sensation and perception. I'm more of a science guy, and I teach research design and research methodology, research ethics, that kind of stuff as well. That's my background.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, Sam, you're next.
Sam, you're silent.
Yeah, you have to unmute yourself, put yourself on microphone, please.
Utility company. I use virtual reality and augmented reality to help workers avoid errors during engineering and construction of projects. I am also a PhD candidate at Drake University. I am preparing to study how work team problem solving.
Thank you. Awesome. So we are going to discuss a couple of topics, and the first topic, as you can see on the board as well, is what we think of the potential of using VR for research. So I want to keep the same order, Geraldine and Sam, and then me, and then we will discuss it a little bit among ourselves. And if you guys have anything to add or questions, I will see it on the board. So I'm really curious, Geraldine, What do you think of the potential for using VR for research?
Well, maybe it's a bit subjective, but to me, it's huge. I mean, doing research in VR is amazing. I think one of the huge potential is ecological validity. We'll be able to have more experimentally controlled tasks. So this is something I see a really huge improvement. And I guess it's also easier for really in general for experimental control in terms of timing, stimuli, responses, and everything. And also, it has been demonstrated that VR would highlight cognitive treatment closer to those used by the brain in natural 3D environments. So basically, you can say what we're doing is closer to what we would do in reality. What I like in VR for research is a great flexibility. You can really design an environment so it's really amplify all the creativity all of you guys, all of us can have in research, all of us can have in research, unlock our creativity. I think in terms also of embodiment, and it's really interesting to see how the participants can interact in the world. So I think it's all huge potential of VR. But maybe Evelyn, you want to add something?
Yeah, I think we all have to add something. For example, I think next to the points you name, I'm doing research about assessment in VR, and it's basically gathering data and interpreting something about how the user is performing, for example. So with VR, you can gather a lot of data, and for some of you, this might sound like old news, but as you can imagine, you can almost measure everything. You can measure head movements, whatever things you pick up, everything. So that's super interesting to think about how can we use that data to say something useful about the performance of the users. And I'm really interested and inspired by that, how we can do that. I see a lot of opportunities and potential considering that. And also for training in VR, I work for a company as well who designs trainings in VR for vocational education. And it's super interesting to also do research about how people perform after doing a training in VR as well, and how they experience this training and if they feel more confident, for example. So that are the topics I'm super interested in, and I see a lot of potential in, among other things, of course. So what do you think, Anthony?
I think I can add just something because it reminds me that for our research, since we're working with teenagers, it's a super cool media to use because they're really engaged. So when considering research with children in general, well, at least above 13 years old, it's really entertaining and they are motivated. You know, it's kind of changing everything in research with children, I think. Well, with teenager for my part.
Yes, for sure. Awesome. What about you guys?
Well, I can, I think for me as a researcher, as a professor, one of the things that VR is really useful for is sort of what Geraldine was saying is control of the stimuli. So when you present something to people, you can perfectly control what it is they see and experience, which is hard to do in the real world. So even let's say you wanted to treat a phobia, something like that, in VR, let's say hypothetically you had a spider phobia. I can decide exactly what kind of spider you see, how close you are to it, what experience you in interaction you actually have with that. And you can control that in a really precise way. One of the benefits of that control is both for the safety and protection of your participants, but also it allows me as an experimenter to isolate individual things I want to look at. So maybe I make the spider blue versus red. This is just an example, but maybe it turns out that color is the really important thing that influences whether someone's scared of a spider. And so I'm allowed to isolate in VR those little individual aspects of something and figure out what's important. So even if you're doing this for marketing, you might be able to isolate one or two individual variables that determine whether a customer buys your product or something. So that's one of the benefits of VR. And another benefit is participants. So one nice thing is I can get a really broad, potentially really broad demographic, because I can, instead of having to just test people that are in my city that can come to my university, I can test people from all over the world, from all different cultural backgrounds, using different VR headsets. This can be a pro and a con in that I mean, you can't always necessarily get a certain demographic if you want, because all those people don't necessarily have headsets. But on the flip side, most of the time, if I'm, say, going to do virtual reality nature therapy, the people who are actually going to use my nature therapy are people who use VR. And so the early adopters, the people that are into VR. And so actually accessing those as my testing subjects actually allows me to isolate exactly the group I really want to target, which is new users of VR, because those are the ones that will actually use nature therapy in VR. So there's some benefits that way too. So that's sort of a couple of big ones for me.
Yes,
Thank
and
you.
adding what you were saying, also because I'm studying hurricane disaster preparedness, and what is interesting in research using VR, it's because you can gradually change the condition of your environment, and it's very crucial in research that you can actually set a new experiment to change one little variation of parameters. So if you start for myself, we start, let's say, with low condition in terms of risk perception for teenager, and then we can, if you want, we can of the wind and have the risk perception of systems. And this is just all programmed in advance, and we just click a button when we do the experiment, basically.
Cool.
So Sam, do you want to elaborate on that? Have you something to add, or do you agree with everything we said?
Well, I guess I was just so certainly everything that Anthony and Geraldine is talking about is fantastic. I think one of the things that's interesting about VR, and if you expand it to AR, I mean, it is a big world of opportunity for application. I think VR can be an excellent tool to study how groups interpret situations and socially construct knowledge. At my work, I am interested in how construction crews identify problems as part of a job, using 360-degree live movies that are created at an actual job site. In the classroom, I can show construction workers, the beginning of a job site, and then we can go through questions about what are the hazards and problems you predict will occur. And then using VR, we can then time warp through future moments in the job together. And then now that we are looking at this new condition, we can now reassess what are the things that we see now that we didn't see before. And I think one ways that VR is beneficial for social construction now is have one person with the headset, and they are immersed in that in a 60-degree environment, casting to another monitor or TV in the room. And then the other people are able to participate in that immersive environment, communicating and jointly interpreting the situation that they're experiencing. I think VR, this is a philosophical worldview sort of approach, I think VR is an excellent tool for studying social construction of knowledge, how people interpret their world.
Beautifully said. Yes, I agree. Great points. Also, let's talk a little bit about the challenges. So I start with the challenges I see, especially in my own research. So the external is working together with everything everybody involved. If you are conducting research in VR, you need, for example, a VR training or a VR assessment. Me as an educational scientist, I don't have the skills to develop this. So I have to work together with developers, programmers, and experts possibly as well, experts on the training, for example, to create this whole environment, this whole VR environment. And then I can conduct my research in that environment. So I have to work together with a lot of parties, I guess, and communicating that, and I guess managing that project can be difficult because everybody speaks another language. It's tricky to not use jargon, right? Next to that, resources are sometimes limited. You know, not everybody has access to a VR headset. Thinking about how VR can continue rather than recreating existing methods, and that also really seems a challenge. So going out of the comfort zone and trying researching something new and not just transferring something that's already known into VR. What do you think, guys? What are your challenges?
Well, so certainly I think we're all familiar with the technology challenges. Certainly anytime you're getting somebody to put on the headset, you know that there's we're going into a world you can't see. I tend to use Oculus Quest, and so I've always got this doubt of whether their Guardian has reset or something else, and so there are those challenges. But obviously, right now we're coping with new concerns about hygiene. We're all talking about that, but even I would guess that some of the folks in the room have been in this situation before. Even before the pandemic, I would try to be fastidious about hygiene of the headset, but there's still really hard just to do. I mean, right now my goggles are starting to get a little fogged up, and as you pass the goggles from person to person, even if you do a nice hygiene treatment in between, then you still get this sort of icky environment for people in a social setting as you pass it around. Now, and some other folks here, might talk more about hygiene, but I'll just one other thing I'll say, if you're doing participatory action research or applied research, I think you have to, as a designer, you have to plan on people being able to experience whatever your study is or whatever your applied research is, even if they aren't going to participate in VR. And so I think that's, back to where if you can still get a valuable participation just by watching the casted monitor of the experience while somebody else does have the headset on. Especially for me in the workplace, we do some, I would say, applied research in problem-solving techniques. I cannot have that be an activity that is exclusionary to somebody who can't or won't put on the headset. And so I have to figure out a way for people to be able to participate if they are not going to go into VR.
Yeah, go ahead.
Totally. Hey, if you want to add something, Anthony.
Yeah, I was just going to really talk about, like, I agree, obviously, with the things that Sam was saying. And at the end of what Sam was saying there about finding a way for other people to participate who aren't necessarily in VR can be a really important point, especially in Sam's case where he's working with groups, right? It doesn't have, it makes sense, right? It doesn't have any, if you're working on group dynamics and problem solving, having one guy in VR by himself doesn't really work on the group part. So that's an element for sure, but it ties into something that is a big element for me as an academic at a university, which is research ethics. And I know research ethics is not the most exciting, fun topic to talk about, but we do have to think about ethics from sort of two perspectives. One is, how do we conduct and collect data from participants in a way that protects them and protects their identities? I mean, the risks run into things like collecting data from a participant and then that another person who works with them sees their data and goes, oh, you do it like that. And, you know, you really have to protect your participants' privacy and personal, because if they don't feel private and protected in the data that they're giving you, they will not give you honest answers. That's just a fact from psych research that there's a ton of evidence about. So they have to feel like they're giving, they can provide the information they want to provide. And if it's sensitive information, they can provide it in a private way. So that's really important. In depending on whether you're working, so that's one point. Point two is it depends on whether you're working live with people, like Sam was sort of talking about, and like we do in my lab pre-COVID-19. There's ethical concerns about, I mean, imagine this, we have a person come into the lab, they fill out some ethics forms, but then ultimately we've used a procedure where a person goes off into a VR room by themselves, well, with one experimenter. So now you've got a participant and a researcher alone together in a room. And for all intents and purposes, the researcher is about to put a blindfold on the participant, which is a VR headset. So now they can't even see what's going on in the room. You can imagine the anxiety this might provoke for some people. This is not necessarily a safe situation for people. So you have to work out procedures that allow you to collect data in a safe and manageable way. An alternative to that, because we probably won't be able to do a lot of ethics related research in the lab, like I won't be able to actually have people in there from a COVID-19 perspective. We're porting a lot of our research into alt space. So we're actually having people come into spaces in alt space and collecting data there and then moving on, so that I don't have to work with people one-on-one directly. And then the last thing I'll just say about ethics, I don't want to go on too long, but the last thing about ethics is if you don't, the key to it is, I know the ethics part isn't that exciting, but if you don't follow the ethics part well, at least think about it, you're not going to get good data. People will lie. People won't tell you the truth. People will do all kinds of different things because they don't feel comfortable in the situation or they don't feel safe in the situation. So the only way to get good data is to have good procedures in the first place. And so that's something for me that's a big challenge in VR, is creating all the new kind of research procedures that we've never had to create before, but we have to create them all for all the different types of VR work we do, whether that's with people in a lab live or whether that's, say, in alt space or something like that. But procedural development for ethics has been challenging, but fun, interesting. So there's my part.
Awesome.
Well, thank you, Anthony. I totally agree with you. The challenges for me would, well, as regard ethics, to add a little bit for my side, as I working with teenager, was to consider, or well, it's still the case, how far I can go, how far can I make them experiment in VR, because we want to prepare them for hurricane, but then how much can you expose someone, even though you want to teach the participant something? So for me, ethics, it's also in terms of psychological effect of the virtual environment and what the participant is going to experiment. Because it's very good to design an experiment and to consider all the variables and to make such a perfect experimental design. But then you need to consider that not all your participants will ride in the same psychological state, and not all your participants will live in the same psychological state. So maybe take it step by step, by prototyping, by gradually thinking about your experimental design. So yes, in terms of ethics, it is a real challenge for us, but we also, I think there's few challenges, but I'm not sure it is related to VR. It's maybe related to doing research with equipment. Well, at least for us, it was, for instance, consider the weight and the size of the HMD. It can be quite heavy, even though I know Oculus is working on that part. Of course, you all mention it, like hygiene. Hygiene is really a concern even more right now. And I think I would call it also, well, something which is getting better, but it's called motion sickness. So you have to consider also your virtual environment with some test, because you may you may have some real physical effect for your participants. So maybe you need to consider, and now there are some papers that are talking about that, that are explaining how to avoid that and so on. And I guess something that I would call, yes, what I say in terms of psychological state, that sometimes you have the transition from one world to another. And sometimes it can be challenging also for your participants to change from real to virtual, because not everyone is feeling very comfortable. And there is an effect, I don't know if you're aware of, probably it's called the Proteus Effect. And it described the phenomenon in which the behavior of an individual within the virtual world is changed by the characteristic of their avatars. So basically, what I mean by that, it has some very nice research in the field of creativity that has been done, showing that when an avatar is, chosen as very creative with what they make some research about what is a creative avatar with long hair, really kind of a mess avatar, to be honest. But then what they show is that people will use this avatar, will be more creative after the test in the virtual environment, because there is some effect that are lasting after experimenting VR experiments. So you guys think about your avatar right now, considering, wow, what are going to be the effect after all? But it's very interesting to see that. Like we see that very much for children, for teenagers especially, when they choose like very strong, big avatars, and then after that they feel different in their posture, in the way they behave. Just for maybe it lasts 15 minutes. It's not very clear for how long it's going to last, but there are some effect lasting after that. And of course, some challenging is also the concern. Like to ask participants to come, there will be some concern for them in terms of eye fatigue, in terms of risk for them. Especially when you speak to parents, you need to make sure that you've been through everything. And well, that's a bit the point I would like to discuss. There are some more challenges, but I think it's really I would say good advice is take your time. Start with a very simple environment, virtual environment, and then when after one and two tests, you can add some other variables, but go step by step.
I think
Awesome. Thank you.
Geraldine brought up several intriguing points, and one of them I think was, I think if you are doing scholarly research and you're considering like your research considerations and limitations, I'm getting ready to speak about big five personality traits for just a moment. I haven't read anything about this. I was just thinking about this while Geraldine was talking about how people's personality can be, expressed through like their avatar selection. I think you probably are wise to at least account for the fact that the people who are willing to participate in a VR-based study tend towards openness to new experiences and possibly trend towards low neurotic. And so there could be a limitation on our research population, just accounting for the people who have the willingness to experiment with new things are the people who will put on the headsets. And then are we creating data that excludes people who maybe have higher neuroses or maybe more traditional mindset, less adventuresome mindsets towards putting on a headset? It might affect the data we create.
Definitely, yes, totally.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, certainly a valid point, Sam, for sure. And again, it just depends on what kind of research question you want to ask. Like you have to ask yourself is, when I do this research with VR in this way, what sample of people am I going to get? Who's going to be in my study? And then you have to ask yourself, is that sample of people going to allow me to answer my research question? And that's sort of the point that Sam is making is if your sample of people is really weird and kind of biased, then maybe it won't answer your research question. But alternatively, my sort of point I was making earlier, which is that for my VR nature therapy, the kind of people that would use it are the early adopters. So in my case, getting that early adopter group is a good thing, right? It actually is my target population. So you just have to ask yourself whether that's the right group for you. Couple quick things just to follow up that I can jump into. Terms of motion perception and it making you sick. Heads up, guys, people are okay with motion like this. Forward and back motion generally won't make people sick. Even little head tilts like this won't make people sick. Up and down like this doesn't generally make people sick. The thing that's going to make people sick every time is if you go like this and then you rotate the camera like that. Now, right there, it's okay because I'm doing it. My brain knows I'm doing it because I'm telling my body to rotate. And so my vision is expecting to rotate. The problem is when the scene visually rotates, but the person didn't initiate it because their body is saying, I'm not rotating, but their eyes are saying you're rotating. And that's when you get nausea. So it's this rotation sideways. So don't shoot any videos and just rotate the camera and then walk this way with it. Like if you're holding a VR camera or something, that rotation will be the problem. So that's just one thing, my experience. And then, oh yeah, one more thing about avatars. A colleague of mine, Dr. Evelyn Field, does research into some of this kind of stuff in VR. And she recently had a student that ran a study where they played a video game. And the only difference going into the video game is what avatar they played the video game as. So male, female, different ethnicities, and so forth. And then they just went and played this VR video game for 5 minutes. And it was like a first-person shooter. And they found that the style in which they played the game was heavily influenced by which avatar they went into the game with, whether it was what its gender was and what its ethnicity was, believe it or not. So that's some really interesting research that hasn't been published yet, but will be soon, hopefully. So those are my little bits adding on to the stuff we've been talking about.
So many golden nuggets for you guys here. So many pieces of knowledge. All right. So I would also really like to get into your questions for the ones who entered on a later moment. I will send you a link right now, which you can open. In there, you can add questions to the boards behind me. So the topics we also wanted to discuss is how it is for us, or what it's like to do research in or with VR, and to give you some practical advice or aspects about doing research in VR. And I see on the board, as you guys also can see, that there are a lot of questions about these topics as well. So I guess we can talk about our experiences using some of your questions, right? So I would like to start with the question, what are best practices for recording and transcribing interviews in Allspace VR? And I know, I'm not sure if any of us has done that, but I'm sure that Anthony can, yeah, exactly, I thought so, can say something about that.
I haven't done a lot of it in VR. I've done it out of VR, a lot of transcribing. But one of the things that you can do in VR that I've been playing around with a little bit lately is this event, as you know, is live streamed, and it's also will then be recorded and put on YouTube later. So one of the things that you can do is if you meet with people actually in a VR setting, so let's say you and I met in a room and I did an interview with you, you can simply record that entire video, like record the room just like we are here. And then it's just like any other situation that's non-VR. When you record an interview, you can go back and watch it and transcribe what they say or pull data from how they moved or behaved. So that's one really effective way that you could do it in VR for sure, is just to simply record the situation. Again, that creates a little bit of an ethics concern in that the minute you put a camera on people, they behave a little bit differently. So that's something to be aware. So that's probably less intimidating here because my camera, well, now I think about it, pros and cons. My camera is another person, like another avatar. That's how you kind of have to do it in here. So then now you're going to have a private conversation with someone in the room, but there'll be a third person in the room. And even if you tell that person that's just a camera, that still might make them feel uncomfortable. Anyway, just little ethics things I'm thinking about on the fly to think about. But maybe the camera's one way to do it. Yeah,
I can add something to that. Well, here, that's exactly the case. Like we have the guys on the back right-hand corner who are just here to record. So we create avatars that will actually view the scene, and then what they view, we record it with like a software called OBS, and then we live stream through YouTube. Well, this is a little bit a trick, let's say. It is not efficient, I would say, like the best option for VR research, as you say, because you need to include a new third person that can, alter your data and interact, add some additional variables to your data or your experiments. But I'd like to mention, if you guys are a little bit okay with the Unity 3D environment, virtual environment design, you can add camera in it without, you won't be able to see it. So by that, I mean, by design, you can build your environment, including an additional camera, but then it will require some tricks. But I think it also depends where you are running your interview, in which platform, if you're doing that in AdSpace VR, in Engage, and there are options. You should discuss with the provider of those solutions. I met few of them, and I know they are working on options because lots of people wants to work in VR, wants to do meeting in VR, and it's kind of crucial for them to record everything. So I'm pretty sure there are solutions, not maybe branded as a for research solution kind of, but yes, you can do that. And the simplest way is to add an additional avatar. The more discreet you can, and then use this avatar as a camera.
Can I
Awesome.
sorry, I just want to jump in with one little follow-up to that, which is that it just sort of occurred to me, another option that you can do here is you guys can all hear our voices quite well, I'm assuming, because we're on something called Megaphone that allows you to hear my voice anywhere in the room. So another option you could do is if you just need the audio recording, like the transcription of what people said, you could simply do the OBS system, which is using an avatar, but it doesn't have to be in the room. It could just be in the room next door. Like, so if you build a map that has 2 rooms in it, you put the avatar and the camera avatar in the room next door, it'll still be able to hear everything, but no one will be able to see it because it'll physically be like, it would be the equivalent of having it like behind that wall or behind the screen. And so it would still be able to hear everything.
Yes.
So that's just a thought I had too.
You also have the tween room. You can use the tween room. I think Evelyn can speak a bit about that. It's when you you speak in a room, and at the same time, us as a speaker are like projected in a mirror room where there will be more people watching. It's a trick to allow more people to watch an event without, let's say, make it trouble in the environment.
Unfortunately,
so this can be a possibility.
You need Allspace for that. That's too bad, because I really like that, but Allspace has to give you access to that feature, if I'm correct. And this only happens when your event is above 13 members in the audience, depending on what room you're in, by the way. Some rooms are bigger. So that's really cool, but it's tricky in Allspace.
I know in Engaged you can also work on that. I prefer Allspace.
I didn't know that. Great. Awesome. Let's answer another question. I like the question, how do you recommend new researchers to get started?
Evelyn, you want to say that again? Your audio was glitching out a little bit, and maybe it was for other people.
Yeah, sure. The question was, how do you recommend new researchers to get started? So I would recommend very briefly, the first things that come to mind: read about your topic till you feel confident and see patterns. That's the first thing you should do. If you don't feel confident, then it all seems very difficult. So then you should read some more, ask for help, and build a solid foundation for your research, considering methodology, as well as Anthony said earlier. So, and I guess we all said that, right?
Well, I would say something also. Well, to get started, first as a researcher in VR, well, you need to feel comfortable with VR. So what you're doing, guys, like coming here, participating at different events, and getting, feeling comfortable with moving, with having a head-mounted device on your head, with knowing everything that crash and everything that is awesome. I think this is a part also of you getting started. And for me, a big step was to take course to learn how to build a virtual environment using Unity 3D. It was a big step because then I felt more comfortable. I didn't feel like, wow, I need some expert next to me to do things what I want to do, and then I'll be, I will have to, ask him. I'll be rely on him all the time. And so the second thing I would recommend is maybe just follow 1 or 2 courses just to get to know how does this work and to build virtual environment. And I think it's quite interesting to do so. And after that, well, read as much research which has been made on your topic in VR as you can, because there's unfortunately not that much. Well, I coming from my previous world was biology, biomedical science, and drug design, so there's a lot of things to work on that topic. But here, when you want to work on VR, it's kind of shorten the number of papers and the research available. So it can be tricky to do yeah, some research and to build your references on that. And I think Sam, you you know quite about that because it might be for you your stage. You want to talk about it maybe?
Well, I mean, certainly, like comprehensive literature review. I think if that's a component of what if you're doing, especially if you're doing academic research, that's where you'd like to start. Just for what it's worth, I don't know. I agree with you, Geraldine, that it is like a lot of research. It's difficult to find exactly the right studies find almost like to define the boundaries of what has been well studied and what has not. Just as a point of personal preference, I enjoy getting the published proceedings of conferences such as the Human Computer Interface Conference on VR, AR, and XR. I enjoy reading those almost like a digest. Um, with respect to starting up VR research, I do think that one of the things you have to, you have to think through is that there's, I think, a different financial outlay associated with VR research. There's obviously the apparatus I've got on my head, right? And I think probably you need to count on having redundancy. Now, especially with COVID, you need to be thinking about what are you doing to take your system to a hygiene, right? And so if you went to buy maybe like a clean bat box, that technology that does UV, you put your headset in it, I think that's like the price of a Quest itself. But then there's also then your financial outlay for your content creation. And Geraldine spoke about having like the power, to do some of her own Unity development. That helps. With the live 3D videos that I like to create of job sites. Like I like InstaPro as the 360 camera. If you buy an InstaPro 2, that's $5,000. If you want to rent it, it's $500, right? And then you've got to do your own editing development. Now that's if you're doing custom content. We'll say the project I've done using Keep Talking, the game Keep Talking, and No One Explodes, where people solve this little bomb. That only cost me $15, right? But I think with a lot of VR research, you have to take into account that there's a different financial outlay than maybe getting somebody to do some, doing some narrative inquiry or interviews or other studies like that.
Yes, good
Yeah.
point. That's definitely true. Okay, let's go on to the other question.
Make me just think about a point, Evelyn, if you agree.
Yeah,
okay.
Go.
Just a quick information, speaking about what you're saying, that you don't need to build your environment in certain field. For instance, in psychology, I know was one of my classmates a few years ago developed a full software called Roger. He built environment made to do psychology VR experiments. So you maybe have a look on what's available, because some company and more companies are working on building already made environments for you guys to use and to start your experiment. So maybe there will be another option. So just mentioning that, maybe interesting. Depends the field, of course, of research.
Can I add just a little quick add-on to that too?
Okay, one last thing. One last thing.
One last thing. I won't be long. The Sam's point is right, and with Geraldine, in that it can potentially be expensive, but it can also be really cheap. So I work at a university, so by definition we have no money, and so I have to work on budgets that are basically $0. So you have to figure out how to make things work, and certain things like certain worlds, like of the worlds that I build for research, some of them need to be very specific and some of them need to be really detailed, and I build them in Unity to get that control. But there's also tons of little worlds that you can build super simple in alt space that are great, that could be potentially great for certain research, just a little meeting room. And then also, if you're setting up research spaces in alt space, the existing templates that alt space already has, so you don't really have to do really hardly any development. You just kind of build the world, it spawns it from an existing template, maybe with a screen and all kinds of meeting areas, and you just use it. So there's that potential as well. So it just depends on making sure you get it right for the research that you are doing.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so the most liked question is, what research question, let's make it a question per person, considering VR, would you like to see answered? So this is maybe a question you guys should take the time for to think about, but I already have a question in mind. So I will start and you guys can think of your question.
Feels like a
So,
challenge.
yeah. If you don't have any by heart right now, then it doesn't matter. But my research question that I'm really curious about, and I'm not researching it myself, unfortunately, not yet, is so I'm doing research about assessment, right? And if I would make an assessment in virtual reality and assess that the participants are performing well during a training in VR, does that mean that they will perform as well in real life? And there is a lot of speculation to say that, well, VR is not one-on-one real life, probably not. But I have not seen any research, or not like a great research or big research conducted about this topic. So I would really like somebody to research the performance on a VR assessment linked to the performance on a real life setting. That would be really interesting to see how well that goes hand to hand, I guess. So that would be my question.
I can go if you want.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
One question that is for me really relevant is, there's been some research that shows in the past, I talked about this a little bit in my talk, but there's been some research in the past that shows that things in VR can affect your mood more if you're really engaged in them. That's not that surprising, right? If you're really engaged in a movie, when you go to the theater, it can affect your mood, right? We all know that. So I'm trying to influence people's mood with nature therapy, lower their anxiety levels and stress. So I want to know how to make stimuli that will engage them as much as possible. And in VR, we call this sort of presence. How does stimuli create presence that makes you feel like you're actually there in that stimuli? And so then it can have a big influence on you. If I show you a VR video, but I'm actually thinking about the party I'm going to go to next weekend, then it's not really going to have much effect. I want to know how to create my stimuli so that they create the most immersion and presence for people that engage them in it. And so that's research area into the topic of presence and what aspects create presence in virtual environments and which ones decrease presence. So it's an area of research that's relevant for where I'm going, my nature therapy stuff. So understanding presence better.
Well, definitely, I share your opinion and Evelyn as well. It sounds really interesting. Well, to me, I would say that the VR research question I'd like to answer, I'm working on it because I was too passionate about it. I work on the risk perception and all VR can impact risk perception, and how can we train people to get ready for natural disaster. And I'm especially focusing on teenager and how can they help communities, and how can we teach them something with VR that will be transferred through communities. So, and I think some topics that hasn't been explored much, I would say it's first comparison of the effect of VR on behaviors and in virtual environment in children or in teenager compared to adults. For me, it's kind of not that clear that they will behave, response, have stimuli answer or whatever the research you're doing. Well, those the teenager are behaving same as adult, because all the research right now are mainly focused with some participants who are adults. And also, we don't know much about some kind of I'm very concerned about the different impact virtual environment can have on our senses, because our senses are immersed, and I don't know in the long term what does it mean when we get used to be in virtual environment. Is it the same that in an early stage when we start to using or behaving in virtual environment? And I'm wondering, especially because I'm working on psychological aspect, if in the long term, we already demonstrate few things, but I think there is a big field over here to do some research on. So if you want to work with VR and teenager, please, there are lots to do.
What about you, Sam?
Yeah, so you just follow me here for a second on a little bit of an arc. So whatever you watch, if you watch professional sports, I'm in the United States and I watch football, or American football, and you see like the athletes, they're entering the stadium and they've got their Bose headphones or their Beats headphones on, and they're, it's a little part of like the way that, NFL Sunday starts or whatever. It's seeing like Aaron Rodgers entering the stadium and he's listening. What he's doing is he's preparing his mind. He's listening to music that he thinks prepares his mind for the upcoming activity, right? For athletic competition, whether he's listening to country music or hip hop or whatever it is that he thinks helps him prepare. Now we know virtual reality helps to changes people's behaviors. One of the landmark studies in 2011 out of Stanford's VR research labs was the study in which participants who cut down trees in VR with a chainsaw, when they took the headset off, and then they went to, and then whenever the researcher would knock over a glass of water and ask that person's help in cleaning up the spill, the people who had been cutting down trees used fewer paper towels to clean up the spill. They had a more resource conservative mindset than people who didn't. We know that VR can be used to change people's behavior. There's other stories like that. I'll say Geraldine's research, right? It demonstrates how VR can be used to escalate what people perceive to be important to them. Geraldine's research is showing that maybe people who don't have a great engagement in disaster preparedness, their engagement with it increases when they participate in a disaster exercise in VR, right? There is, and I guess I'm just going to try and, Evelyn, it comes back to your question at the beginning. I think you said, like, does the effective training last after people do something in VR, right? I think there is wide open questions into how VR can be used to shape people's behaviors. There's immense ethical issues with this, but in the United States, what we are talking about now, among the things, is implicit bias in police, right? And the data indicates that all this implicit bias training that police are getting in this classroom, it doesn't change their behavior. But are there empathetic applications of VR that do more than just teach you how to perform a task, but actually adjust your behavior to be more empathetic, to, I guess what I call it, behavioral tuning. And it's back to the way that Russell Wilson, he's getting his mind ready to play football. Is there something that can be used for application of VR to prepare somebody to go out there and have a more empathetic approach to police work or other sorts of appropriate behavioral adjustments, different than training, changing people's behaviors and beliefs? Okay, there you go. I had to wind myself
Thank
up
you.
for that.
We have so
think
much to talk
it's
about.
it's a real
Unfortunately, it's
milestone.
almost time. I would love to talk longer to you guys. Maybe it's a fun thing to end off with. I also see the question on the board. How has the VR researchers meetup or track helped you with your research? Maybe we can I'll give one sentence in how it has helped, inspired you, or motivated you, or whatever. And then end this session. I already want to thank you so much for participating, all the speakers, all our wonderful moderators, Diamond and Fox and CJ. watching the live stream and the beautiful audience as well. So we will let you go with the answer to the question, how has the VR researchers team or community helped us with our research? Anthony, do you want to start with that?
Sure, I'll start. It's been really, really helpful. It's created a sense of community for me. COVID-19, I'm working at home. A lot of us have had that experience. It's so fantastic to find a group of people that are interested in the same kind of things that you're interested in, passionate about it. And then that also creates a resource team that we can bounce ideas off of and ask questions and stuff. So it's been really fantastic. That's been my experience.
Awesome.
Well, to
Geraldine?
me, it's amazing because I'm living in Guadeloupe. It's a small island in the Caribbean Sea, and I think the field of VR allowed me to do international research and to discuss easily and meet easily people without traveling from there to there, and I really like that. And I think for me, the sense of community. Yes, I found right. I started to buy my HND. Right, I started to have an Oculus. I started to meet lots of person working on with VR and research, and it's amazing since it's a short field. This is still an emerging field, I would say, in the research area. We are a very I think very strong community, very helpful. So yes, I don't know if I'm answering well, but I really love the community of researcher in VR, and for me it was super helpful, and I hope it would keep on that way, and we will still be helping each other a lot. And I don't really feel the size of university in VR, to be honest. I mean, well, in the past, in other fields, sometimes because you're a small university, you're studying there or there, it's not the same. But in VR, I really did not feel that. We are all avatars speaking together, you know.
You know, for me, it's the ability to have a population, a group of people that I can talk to, and we already know what the subject matter is before we start. With my doctoral cohort, I have to start out by explaining to them what VR is. I have to start out by explaining to them the difference between VR and XR and AR and all these things, and then we can get into with the people in this room. We already have a foundation of shared understanding, which is I can start talking about research and I can start talking about VR, and you all know both.
Yes. Oh, it's great to hear, guys. For me, it's basically the massive network of people who are like-minded, who like VR, who like doing research, and most importantly, who all want to help each other out. That's not certainty, right? I really like that we inspire each other, and I hope we can keep on doing that. Thank you so much for being in this panel with me, for presenting, for hosting workshops. You are more than welcome. And I really hope you guys stay active in this community because it's a beautiful thing. So for the audience, I hope you enjoyed this. In 2 weeks, we have a regular networking meetup. There you will be able to talk a lot as well with each other, which is also really fun. And probably, definitely I will be there, and maybe some people on the stage will be there as well, so you can have a chat with them as well. This will be on June the 30th, so you can see it in the events calendar on Altspace as well. You can click on interested and you will get a notification about it, so you won't forget. So I hope to speak to you guys soon. Don't forget you can keep connected with each other through the Discords. You can see that on your right on the wall. There's a Education VR banner with some links on there, so you can find. Yeah, exactly. You guys cannot point at it. Great. It's over here.
I'm not as
Here you
good as
can
you.
find.
My controller just died. Look, my
Oh,
hand
no.
went away. Bye-bye.
Awesome.
The
So
battery
keep
died.
connected. Don't be shy. Thank you so much. Let's give these guys a hand. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Awesome. So next week there will be the Ireland conference, which is free to attend, and there will be also a lot of interesting talks over there. So if you are curious about that, you can check them out as well. I will be speaking as well, but there are a lot of other super amazing people speaking there, which I will definitely check out. So maybe see you guys there. Have a nice day or evening or night, depending on your time zone. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
And some of us, I think, could probably hang around for a little bit if anyone has any questions or anything.
Yes. Yeah, so Anthony said he will hang around. I unfortunately have to go to my next meeting, even though it's already late here. I have another meeting, time zones, you know.
I can stay for a
So
little
see
bit. I
you
have
guys
another
in 2
meeting.
weeks.
Bye,
Oh,
everyone.
you as
I'll
well.
talk to you online. Bye, everyone. I'm sure I'll talk to you before then.
I will